Good morning from sweltering Kansas City. Welcome to Sports Beat Live, our weekly conversation and therapy session about the Royals. We talk Kansas City baseball with people in the media who know them best, and with you. Please send us your questions and comments, and we'll talk Royals with you. Shout out to our presenting sponsor, the University of Kansas Health System. You'll hear from them later in the show. And we've got Vahe Gregorian, Sam McDowell in the house, and Lynn Worthy from Los Angeles. Is the sun up there yet in LA, Lynn?
I believe it is, but I'll say this: it's early, and I haven't eaten yet. So if I'm particularly grumpy with anything Sam McDowell says today, we'll chalk it up to that.
Well, I think we've all been there with Sam. So, but grumpy with these Royals, with what they're doing this past week. We've done about a dozen of these shows, and I think this is the first time that we have gathered to talk about a team that had a winning record for the week. And that's what's happened for the Royals, who continued their West Coast trip with Monday's win over the LA Angels, 6-2. Chris Bubic was really, really good last night. I want to talk about him and Lynn, just what's happening, what's going right with the Royals on this trip after they dropped the first two to the Giants. They've won 4 out of 5, and I think I was looking at the teams just game by game, and last night was the first time they won a game after a loss. Let me see if I can get this out right. So the Royals had a 3-game winning streak, and then they lost, and then they picked up a win, right? So 4 wins in the last 5 games. When the Royals had won 2 or 3 in a row, 3 was their longest winning streak before this. It's still their longest winning streak of the season. And then when they lost, they didn't win the next day. They would follow a winning streak with a losing streak. And usually the losing streaks were longer than the winning streak. So good sign that they ended up losing on Sunday in Oakland, but come back and win on Monday night against the Angels. And yeah, so long-winded way of asking you, Lynn, what's been going right for the Royals this past week?
Well, and it was I believe they hadn't won back-to-back games on the road. Now they won 3 in a row on the road during this trip. What's been going right has been they've been pitching really well. I think that's the first thing that jumps out is just particularly the starting pitching, but really the pitching overall has done really well on this trip. But the starters have, gone deep in the games. They haven't, taxed the bullpen the way that we saw earlier this season. Of course, you've gotten timely hits and you've gotten some big hits, but they had I think it was a 2-0 win. They had, like a 3-2 win. So it wasn't like, and obviously last night you had 3 home runs and 6 runs. So you had some games where the offense carried you a little bit more than others, but the pitching has been the mainstay throughout.
And both starters and the bullpen, right? But starting pitching really notable the past week. It's been an ERA of about 3 with an opponent's batting average under 200 during these winning ways for the Royals. And they're getting it from everybody. It was Bubic last night. Brady Singer took the loss on Sunday, gave up his usual 3 runs and 5 in the 3rd innings. But then, Daniel Lynch, 10 strikeouts. Was that I think it was Saturday's game. He had the 10 Ks. And Jonathan Heasley been pitching well. Brad Keller with a good outing his last time out. So, yeah, just down the line, Royals getting good starting pitching, and then the bullpen throwing up zeros for the most part during this West Coast trip. So that, to me, asks the question, have the Royals turned a corner on starting pitching with the young starting pitching? And if so, do we begin to look at the season a little differently? Sam, I'll ask you that. What starting pitching has been the kind of what we've all kind of based the future of the Royals on the 2018 draft class that was full of starting pitching, and we're waiting for them to develop and waiting, and maybe we're seeing some signs here recently that they're going to move in the right direction.
Yeah, I think last week when we were on, we talked about the fact that this team was dead last in the league in strikeouts and walks, which is a hard combination to achieve. they're getting much better with the walks portion of it, and you're sort of in that scenario where you say, let's solve one at a time. But you mentioned the starters ERA is 3.11 since June 13th. They're walking only 3.1 guys per 9 innings. They're at 4.2 for the year. So they're a full walk better per 9 innings than what they were. But they're also throwing more quality strikes. It's not just that they're throwing more strikes. When you look at the outer edges of the strike zone, the Royals are throwing 31.8%. Royals are throwing 31.8% of their pitches on the edges of the strike zone. Over this 7 games on the road trip, every single game they've been throwing a better percentage than that. So they're throwing more quality pitches, not just throwing more strikes.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what it's about. And so 2 weeks ago, the world wanted Cal Eldred fired, the Royals pitching coach. And look, I'm not saying that we should maybe change the way we feel based on just a couple of starts worth of for each pitcher worth of production. But boy, when the Royals fired the hitting coach Terry Bradshaw, the cry was, did the right did the right coach get fired? And at least now Cal Eldred has we just don't hear his name as much anymore. And listen, Vahe and Sam, I know you were both had an audience with Dayton Moore yesterday, and Eldred's name came up. Now, it was kind of an odd situation. It wasn't at a press conference, but it turned into one at the at the function, and he talked about Cal Eldred, and Vahe. He was pretty upbeat and positive about his pitching coach.
He was, and Blair, just to go to the crux of what you're asking to begin with, I guess it's too soon to say, in my mind, that they've turned a corner, but I think it's not too soon to say the rest of this season is where we'll understand this, right? I mean, this sort of was always going to be a developmental season, and if developments happen in a way that are more palatable in the weeks and months to come, particularly with the pitching staff, I think we'll look at it differently. So there's that. But to your broader point, or your more specific point about Cal yesterday, I thought that Dayton was trying to give just sort of a general, I don't know if tip of the cap is the right word, vote of confidence, something to that effect. But I didn't think he got into the weeds very much about any specifics. I think he just kind of wanted to convey faith in Cal Eldred when he knows that there's a lot of people who certainly are in social media and among other Royals fans that are feeling like that's the next thing that has to happen, that a change has to happen there. And so that's sort of my whole takeaway from it. I think we can say this, though, and I'd be interested to know what everybody else thinks, that they made this decision with Terry Bradshaw. That was sort of a very jarring decision early in the season, but I think it reflected what the disconnect between old school Terry Bradshaw's points of emphasis and a little bit of the new wave of what the Royals have really been wanting to stress for a couple of years. I don't think we understand. I don't understand anyway, philosophically, how that the parallel of that in the pitching area. But I think we can say that they're certainly cognizant of the pitching deficiencies. They're working on it. They care about it as much as they would care about the hitting, and they have not identified that Cal Eldred is their problem. Now, whether that's denial or just responsible stewardship, I guess we'll sort of have to learn to understand in the months to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things at play there with Cal Eldred. One is that I don't see an obvious replacement for him on staff like they had with Terry Bradshaw. Two, I do think Cal Eldred has adopted a lot of the philosophies that they want to want to adopt. It wouldn't represent the same sort of philosophical change if you made a change of pitching coach that it did a hitting coach. But getting to what Dayton said yesterday, Blair, because I do think that's an important topic to bring up. And, we were all out there. We all saw the full 25 minutes of Dayton Moore. And I know that snippets of what he said were tweeted out, and I didn't think provided the full context of exactly what he said. He was asked specifically by Todd Lebo from 810 how Cal was holding up, basically. And that was his response to that. And to me, the problem is not what Dayton Moore said, because what can a general manager say? I mean, he's not going to say, yeah, Cal's not doing a very good job this year. Like, he's never going to say something like that. The problem is that he doesn't have things to point to with Cal Eldred to provide specific examples to us as, look at what we're doing as a pitching staff in this area or this area or this area. That's the problem. So I know a lot of people are into the semantics of what the words of Dayton Moore. But I actually thought it was more telling that he said, and we'll look at it at the end of the season. If I'm Cal Eldred, I'm not very confident that my general manager said, or president of baseball operations said, we're going to look at this at the end of the season. And I didn't think that was as big of a vote of confidence as what it was made out to be by the reaction of a lot of people from the snippets that were tweeted out.
I don't know. I guess I would think that it's better than we'll take a look at it at the All-Star break, and
or tomorrow.
That's right. Or as soon as I leave here today.
Now that you bring Cal up, yeah, let me look at
it is a good point, though, Sam, that you make about what do you expect Dayton Moore to say in the moment, right? Of course he's going to publicly support. I imagine if he was asked about Terry Bradshaw the day before he was fired, he would have come out and supported Terry Bradshaw as well. That, when you avail yourself to the media as often as Dayton Moore does, and as far as the length of time for which those events happen, everybody who wants to ask a question does, and in fact there were several questions that were repeated. So, but that's just that's Dayton Moore, and he feels the responsibility to speak to the fans through the media, and we salute him for that. So, yeah, it's fair to quibble with some of the things some of the responses that he has, but it's also important to discuss what maybe some between the lines and maybe try to interpret a little bit of what he said.
Well said, Blair.
Speaking of,
go ahead.
Vahe. No, please go ahead.
Just this sort of, it's interesting because it was a generous amount of time in a big picture sense, 20-25 minutes. On the other hand, it was a little cursory in that I didn't think it wasn't going to be long sit down with us getting to do long exchanges and follow-ups in such a way that he might go into more depth about Cal if he had intended to or had more that he wanted to say. So that's all. I'm just not sure that he was looking to be comprehensive in terms of those answers either.
Okay. Hey, we're going to take a break here. And when we come back on the other side, we'll continue to talk about pitching because the Royals have a decision to make later this week. And we'll get Lynn's thoughts on what's going to happen with the rotation once Zach Greinke returns. Okay, let's hear from the University of Kansas Health System.
March 4th, 2015, I got out of the shower and felt a lump in my left breast.
We were able to quickly uncover that she had 2 subtypes of breast cancer, each of them requiring separate and unique treatment plans. This is why you come to the University of Kansas Cancer Center.
It is critical to be treated by a team of experts in that specific cancer type. If you don't start with us, I think you'll have more questions than answers.
Why would you go anywhere else?
Welcome back to SportsBeat KC. We're talking Royals baseball with you and with star columnist Sam McDowell and Vahe Gregorian, and beat writer who has not had breakfast yet, Lynn Worthy. All right, Lynn, Royals have a decision to make because baseball's made a decision, right? Or at least they finally are going to implement the decision of the 13 pitcher limit. The Royals have been carrying 14. They've already made that that decision, correct? I mean, Cam Gallagher is now up, and Peacock went down, but now they have another decision to make with Zach Greinke returning. Looks like later this week, and how is that going to impact the Royals' rotation?
Well, as of right now, they've got 5 starters. Zach Greinke would represent a 6th, and you don't have an extra pitcher spot, so the math there is a little shaky. Right now, you're looking at a rotation that currently has Chris Bubich, Daniel Lynch, Brad Keller, Brady Singer, and Jonathan Heasley. You add Greinke to that, and somebody's got to go. You're just not sure exactly where they're going. On top of that, somebody's going to have to go off the roster as well. So we don't know if that means somebody goes down to AAA. We don't know if that means somebody gets moved into a bullpen role. We don't know if potentially I don't think it's all that likely you lose somebody from the bullpen, especially since you just lost somebody from the bullpen. But it sounded like the door is still open, or at least we'll find out, I think, in the next day or so here out here in Anaheim what their plan is going to be. But Mike Matheny was not ready to share that with us yesterday.
Yeah, kind of an interesting move here, isn't it, Sam?
Yeah, I'm wondering if, Lynn has obviously been on this whole road trip, if he's getting any feel for the possibility of going with 6 while the other 5 are actually throwing well for the first time collectively this year.
I was thinking about whether or not that's the way they go. I just wonder how that plays out as far as coverage out of the bullpen. I wonder if that means somebody has to be available on the day, a bullpen day out of the bullpen. I mean, the day they would throw their side session, what that means they're available out of the bullpen. We've seen some versions of that in the past. Even earlier this year, I think within the last couple of weeks, there was a homestand where they were short in the pen, and I think Chris Bubich waited until after the game to throw his side session because they thought they might have to use those pitches in the game. So I don't know if that's the way you go. I think if you're going to go with 6, you almost have to, because you don't have, an extra reliever. And I think we've talked about how many of the short starts they've had this season. And I don't think I really realized how many they were until I was writing yesterday, and I went back and looked up, how, because they're going to be short in the bullpen, how many of those starts that they had where guys didn't get to at least 5 innings. I mean, not even counting the 5 and dive innings, but just the guys who didn't even get to 5 innings. And I think when Carlos Hernandez was here, he had 6 of those starts. Bubich has had something like 5 of those starts, and every one of those guys has had multiple of those starts, except for Singer, who hasn't been in the rotation throughout the whole season. So I think that's a real concern when you have a short bullpen, and the idea that, maybe you're going with an extra starter. You're going to have to do something to make sure you've got innings covered.
Yeah, I do think that what Lynn said, he quoted Mike Matheny as being concerned about the roster limitations, forcing you to have one fewer pitcher than what the Royals were carrying, and worrying about injuries already. So obviously, if you go with 6, you've got even one fewer yet in your bullpen. So it does seem like somebody's going to have to get bumped. And Bubich has sort of been the last guy in here, but for sure has had his best stretch of the season here. He's thrown just in this streak, he's only given up 2 runs in each of his last 2 starts. He had an outing before that where he threw 5 shutout innings against the Astros. It's a dilemma that a week ago none of us thought the Royals would have.
Yeah. That's how about that? Which one of the starters is which one of these guys who's throwing so well do they bump out of the rotation? That's what everybody was saying a week ago.
Go ahead,
a week ago was, can you go with a 3-man rotation?
Yeah. It was funny too, because thinking about that going into yesterday's start before Bubich threw, and with the everybody in the rotation having thrown so well, I asked Mike Matheny. I said, asked him about that, and then I said, so these next couple of starts where you've got some of your young guys pitching, I said we shouldn't necessarily think of those as auditions for that last spot. And Matheny said, no. And he added, and if it was, I wouldn't tell you.
Hey, just to chime in, maybe this is Captain Obvious, which is my starring role, but if we're at a stage here where we're talking about that this season really is about development more than anything else, and in a certain sense about 2023, 2024 even, then aren't we talking about a matter of what the real priorities have to be demonstrated to be? And if that's the case, don't we need to see the five guys who are starting now start? And I don't know where that leaves Greinke. I don't know if it means a 6-man situation. I don't know, but go back to how you phrased this to begin with, Blair. It is a little bit of a dilemma philosophically, I think, even in terms also of execution, but also of what the statement is.
I do think that makes it a lot tougher, Vahe. I mean, you don't want to boot a guy like Chris Bubich or, I think Daniel Lynch is certainly safe, but you don't want to boot guys like Chris Bubich or Jonathan Heasley out of your rotation purely because, the Royals have these sort of artificial markers before they feel like they can really judge players, and it's all about experience in the major leagues. I think a lot of them say, what is it, Lynn? Like 90 starts? I mean, it's a large number before they feel like you know what you have in a starting pitcher. And, you don't get starts by being in Omaha or in the bullpen. So I absolutely think what you said, Vahe, is a major wrinkle in all of this. And it sounds like what you're saying is to bench Zach Greinke. So just wanted to fill in your thought there.
If I were a columnist, I'd write that, Sam.
Well, I also, Sam, you mentioned, like, oh, well, you don't get starts by going somewhere else. I mean, I guess technically speaking, somebody could get starts down at AAA. I mean, guys have been throwing well here, so you hate to say, okay, you've been throwing well here, but you're going to be leaving here just because a numbers game, especially guys that you think maybe you're thinking about going forward. Again, the roster limit sort of makes it tough to think about a 6-man, but at the same time, when you've got as many young guys and guys who haven't pitched full seasons, under normal circumstances where you could adjust the roster, 6-man probably would make even more sense because, as you're looking at the guys in the rotation, aside from Greinke, who you think you can count on for innings, the rest of the guys haven't pitched full seasons, really. I mean, even Keller, who's been your guy who's had the most innings, he's never gone past, I think it's 165 and a third or something like that. And Singer last year had one full season, but he had a couple of IL stints, so I think he stopped at 27 starts. So you don't have that many guys who've actually done this. So, maybe it's, if you had more wiggle room, you say, okay, Greinke's the guy that we know we're going to get innings from, put him back in so that when the other guys have whatever it's going to be, whether it's short starts, whether it's, have to take a break, whether it's, have to manage their innings, you have the one guy you can count on. I guess the flip side of that also is just that, well, if these guys are going to be able to get stretched out to throw these many innings, then you got to throw them now so they can get to that point.
I think maybe the solution is to bring Greinke back as a catcher because the Royals don't seem to carry enough of those on the roster right now.
Well, he can field any position, Blair. So
he can. He's the most versatile. So, all right. Hey, let's use the last few minutes of this show and discuss a former Royal. Lorenzo Cain was DFA'd in Milwaukee this week. He got his 10 years of service time in, and really nice gesture on the Brewers' part to keep him and then let him get his 10 years so he can qualify for the max pension in baseball. Of course, that's the organization he started with, came to the Royals in the trade along with Alcides Escobar. And of course, the Royals had their shortstop and center fielder for the great teams of the past decade. So just wanted to ask Vahe and Sam about their favorite memory of Lorenzo Cain. But Lynn, you were not covering the Royals and weren't in Kansas City then, but I know you wrote the story about Lorenzo departing here. And let me just ask you, is there any chance of the Royals bringing him back letting him retire as in a Royals uniform?
I didn't get that sense. Obviously there's still people who feel like he's a major part of this franchise's history, the run that they had, 14 and 15, just shaping, even just for this front office, obviously he's a key figure in them. I think JJ Piccolo described it as maybe the biggest trade that they've had, in their time here. But I don't know if that's really the sense of that. It was funny though, just thinking back to, it must have been spring training in, I don't remember if it was 20 or 19. If it might have been 20 before the pandemic, being out at the Brewers spring training site, and you had Royals fans out there, and Kane's coming up, and there's a lot of cheers, and you could hear Royals fans. So I think somebody, he shouted out, and he won a World Series with us. And the Brewers fans yelled back, "No, but he's ours now." And it was just funny. That was the first thing that came to mind as I started hearing people talk about, well, maybe he'll sign a one-day contract to retire with the Royals. And, of course, Brewers fans were like, oh, he was with us to begin his career. So it's just the thing that was bouncing around in my head as this unfolded.
Polite Midwest fan bases going after each other. I like it. So, all right. Hey, so Vahe and Sam, what do you remember most about Lorenzo Cain?
Well, I just go ahead, Sam.
I mean, I think the play where he scores from first base, which eventually becomes the game-winning run in the ALCS clincher.
Amazing.
Enemy of the show, Andy McCullough, wrote a great story about yesterday. But Lorenzo, I would like also to point out as a complete side note that before Patrick Mahomes' fake old man walk, there was Lorenzo Cain's old man jog down the first baseline. Like he invented the Izzy Hurt with something wrong with his hammies strut. So Lorenzo Cain just played the game in such a cool style. I thought he was always available to us in the media. Never didn't take questions with us. I just thought he was a great guy to interact with in the clubhouse. But yeah, I mean, he completely changed the way center field I thought was played at Kauffman Stadium. I mean, you had to have somebody who could roam center field. And amazing, the Royals had two of those guys with Gerard Dyson and Lorenzo Cain actually shift into right field at times to make room for Gerard Dyson. And Cain was probably about the best fielder in the game at that time. So just a guy that could help you in so many ways win a game.
Just a few things with him. What first thing comes to mind is, of course, the oddity of that being the Zach Greinke trade, right? And how that has sort of had a lasting effect. I don't know what it was thought to be at the time, but I imagine it was not thought to be a winning Royals trade at the time, or at least not to the extent that it became. The other thing with him, it's funny, there's so many things to think about in what he did, but for some reason, what really stands out to me is 2014 in Baltimore, where he made so many plays that you had this sense that he, not single-handedly, but he absolutely was a guy just deflating the Orioles every time they hit a ball that looked like it was going to be extra bases. I just can't keep all the plays straight in my head. There were so many. And that was part of the beauty of that team. The other thing with him, too, I remember getting here in 2013 from St. Louis, and he was a little injury prone. There was some stuff with his stride and things like that. And I think that's just a reminder that sometimes these breakthroughs come in different points. And we'll see how that plays out with the current Royals and what breakthroughs are ahead. But I don't know that we foresaw what was going to come with him after his first couple of years.
One thing that I always found interesting about Lorenzo Cain is we all agree his defense was phenomenal. And I think he won one Gold Glove in his career. And that was because Gold Gloves are awarded by position, and he was always moving around, right? And so Alex Gordon won all the Gold Gloves in left field, but Lorenzo Cain would play right, play in center, and never seemed to have enough games in one position to qualify for a Gold Glove. And all he was the best defensive player, and maybe one of the best defensive players in Royals history. And scoring from first on the single in Game 6 of the ALCS was incredible. 2015, and in 2014, Vi, you make a good point. in the opening series against the Angels, he made a couple of defensive plays out there in center field that I thought set the tone for the whole postseason for the Royals. He just was phenomenal. So great Royal. He'll be in the Royals Hall of Fame, of course.
Just one other thought. I wonder how many kids in the Kansas City area have batting gloves and they step back from the plate and unwrap them and put them back on every single pitch because of him, which is kind of a cute little quirk, but is part of the reason the game is so slow.
I was gonna say, if that number is 1, it's one too many.
I also liked how he leaned back on the, on the big swings too. That was really cool. And as Pete Gradhoff mentioned in his tribute to Lorenzo Cain, his smile, he had the greatest smile of the, of the Royals of that era. So, all right, let's get out of here. Thanks a lot to everybody for watching. Thanks to Lynn and Vahe and Sam for their insights today. Thanks to the University of Kansas Health System for presenting today's show. And we'll be back a week from today, 10 a.m. on Tuesdays, Sports Beat Live, talking Royals with you. Thanks a lot.